Many in Canada expected the two sides to agree to start formal talks on a free trade agreement. Instead, they will begin exploratory talks. For more on that, I spoke with Diane Francis. She's an American-Canadian journalist and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. I asked her what she read into comments from President Xi about his meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau.
Well, I think he's being exceedingly diplomatic. For those people who thought that the actual formal talks would initiate as a result of the summit this past week, and it didn't, but that's okay. I mean, the famous Chinese proverb is, you know, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the earth beneath your feet. So the fact that Trudeau, our prime minister, went there to start to dialogue with the Chinese leadership is the beginning of the journey. And, you know, it'll take a long time. The Canadian talks with China represents the first G7 country that is actually entering into talks. So, of course, it's going to be more complex than other trade agreements that China may or will get involved in. And the European deal with Canada took I think, 8 or 9 years. So from initiating it. So it's the beginning.
Trudeau basically echoing the themes of President Xi in a sense. It was Xi, of course, who staked out China's approach at Davos as a vocal proponent of globalization. Trudeau saying before the meeting with Xi, it's a time where there is much political space given up in various countries for populism or resurgent nationalism, really. And Canada standing strongly as a country that is making a case for international trade that benefits everyone. It seems as though these two countries, in many respects, simpatico in that respect.
Well, there are some, let's face it, there's some different, obviously very different cultures, very different political systems, very different economic structure. And perhaps I would even argue on values. There's some differences in terms of various ways their society in China is constructed as opposed to Canada's. But make no mistake, I mean, of all prime ministers in Canada, this is the man whose father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was the first Western leader to recognize communist China. So there is a willingness and an interest and a tolerance in coming to some mutual accommodations.
Trudeau's trade minister staying behind for talks in Beijing. Do we read anything into that?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, what you can read into that is that there's a willingness and an appetite to come to some kind of common way forward. But, you know, there are some obstacles, and this is a very complicated matchup. I mean, we're already, you know, very fully involved in the NAFTA experiment, which is now being renegotiated. And, you know, there's very little difference between the Canadian and the American cultures and societies and governments and institutions. And yet that is taking months and months and months. So this is not going to happen overnight.
Talk to me about Trudeau and the expectations of the domestic audience in Canada, how they viewed this trip. How important was it for him?
Canadian public is in agreement that you should have many, many markets to ensure our prosperity. However, they are very concerned that as a little country compared to a big country like the U.S. or China or Europe, we make sure we take care of ourselves, because otherwise, bilaterally, maybe we can get overtaken if we don't think through things very carefully.
Journalist Diane Francis with analysis there.